we got to talk about sex. Spartans are superhuman in practically every metric that you can measure them. But what happens when they have kids? Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today we're going to discuss another subject that I discussed with Z-Force in a recent Discord discussion. Again, if you want to get involved in future discussions and perhaps sow the seeds of inspiration for future videos, I strongly recommend jumping into the Discord. Again, thanks to Z-Force for the discussion and for helping flesh out what is ultimately become this video and the previous video on what life may be like in the 26th century. So with that said, let's get into this video. It is in fact no secret that Spartans can, and indeed have, had children. The first were the Spartan ones, or the Orion candidates. Now, we don't actually know much about their augmentations, but if Johnson is anything to go by, it must be pretty impressive. He was extremely talented in combat, and despite ultimately passing away at the age of 78, looked more like he was in his mid to late 30s. So, fair play to him. There are only a precious few Spartan ones that we're actually aware of, Johnson being one, another simply being known as Morales, a person by the name of James, but formerly James Lee, and his wife Gilly James, who was also a Spartan one. And from these individuals and a few others, we are aware of some children born of the Spartan ones. These were informally called Spartan 1.1s, and they included Kevin Morales, Janissary James, Benji Wong, and then Guy, Franny, and Darren. Now there are very interesting backstories on all of these individuals, however what we're interested in here specifically are their traits. Now they were just the children born of Spartan 1s, but in so doing, they were born with higher than average intelligence, increased strength, superior muscle density, increased speed, faster than normal reflexes, enhanced vision and hearing, inability to become intoxicated, decreased amount of time required for sleep, increased lung capacity, heightened sense of balance, accelerated cellular regeneration, immunity to most illnesses. That's quite a plethora of additional traits granted to these children who were born simply of individuals who had received a subset of augmentations, of which we still don't actually know the full information regarding. So this then begs the question, if there were children born of the Spartan ones and they had those kind of traits as a consequence, what would the children born of the other Spartan generations exhibit? Well, the Spartan 2s are an interesting case. The Spartan 2s actually lack a sexual drive. Now, this does not mean that they are incapable of having children. It's not that they're chemically castrated or something along those lines. They're just not really interested in sex. But they can, and have, had children. Maria 062 and Randall 037, independent of each other, mind you, had both had kids. Maria 062 was actually injured and then decided to retire as a consequence. She could no longer serve as an active Spartan 2. She retired and then raised a family. She was actually apparently recovered well enough to actually field test Master Chief's Mark 6 armor before he received it on Cairo Station. And Randall was an active Spartan 2 who was actually stranded on a colony and spent the next couple of decades living amongst the survivors on that colony, meeting a wife and having a child. But the interesting thing about the Spartan 2s is, though they had exceptional genetic markers, making them already superior to a normal base human anyway, all of their augmentations, or nearly all of their augmentations, were purely surgical. Now, of course, having a surgical augmentation and then expecting that to somehow be passed on to a child would be like having a hip replacement before you have a kid and then your kid being born with an artificial hip. It doesn't really work that way. But the Spartan 2s did receive a plethora of genetic augmentations and other biological and chemical-based augmentations which enhanced other parameters of their physiology. So these children would already have immensely superior genetic markers. But it's also likely that since the Spartan 2s received gene therapies, that they might actually be able to be passed down. Again, we don't know based on how far those therapies went and if that did actually interact with and alter every single cell in the body, including the sex cells. But given that the Spartan 2s were an advancement on the Spartan 1s, it stands to reason that many of these would, well, pass down, so to speak. The knock-on effect basically being that these children would probably have extremely elongated natural lifespans, on the order of centuries. They would age significantly slower, and at the very least have a significantly increased healing factor. Judging by, for example, John's recovery time, approximately on the order of 10 times faster than normal base human. It is worth noting, however, in both of these instances with both Maria and Randall, they both had children with normal humans, not with other Spartans. So one would assume that some of those traits would have been diluted, because obviously having a child is having both the parents' genetic material blended together. I will also hasten to add that we have never actually witnessed such traits because we know basically nothing about the children of Maria and Randall. No Spartan 2 has also ever had kids with any other Spartan, which would then likely compound those traits rather than dilute them, genetically speaking. But again, since it's never happened, we don't know. Spartan 3s are an interesting case because, again, they don't express the suppressed sexual drive as a consequence of the thyroid implant. So, as a consequence, if they don't have a suppressed sexual drive, they're much more likely to chase their sexual instincts and thus, as far as nature is concerned, lead to kids. But I'll also put it on the table right now that we have no information whatsoever in regards to whether any Spartan 3 has ever had kids, mainly because very few of them lived long enough. Those specifically of the earlier companies went on suicide missions that had a near 100% mortality rate. And generally speaking, when they went on those missions, they were 14 years old. In fact, the only company of Spartan 3s that are still operational as far as we're aware are those of Gamma Company. And that would be interesting to say the least, because they received illegal augmentations, which then require the constant need for smoothers or an antipsychotic medication. This trait would most likely pass down to their children, meaning the children would be born with intense psychosis. Not necessarily the greatest mindset for integration into society as a whole, or indeed usefulness for military service. It is worth noting, however, that since the Spartan 3's augmentations were almost entirely chemical and catalyst based, means that they'd be much more likely to pass down to their children, even if to a lesser degree. The augmentations, since they're chemical and catalyst based, had to bond to their physiology entirely, and, well, to be quite honest, we don't honestly know if that goes so far as to altering every cell in the body, very similar to the Spartan 2s, and whether that also goes as far as altering the sex cells. But again, as it is somewhat based on the Spartan 2s, whom are also somewhat based on the Spartan 1s, and the Spartan 1.1s exhibited such huge amounts of traits, it stands to reason, hypothetically, that those augmentations would pass on to some degree, even if to a lesser degree. And then we get to the Spartan 4s. Now, the Spartan 4s are unique, at least as far as the newer generation Spartans. Obviously, the Orion candidates were fully grown adults, but the Spartan 4s are fully grown, consenting adults. Now, some may have already had kids before becoming a Spartan, so in which case their kids are just completely normal. Or, if they had kids since becoming a Spartan 4, again, many of the genetic augmentations and perhaps some of the chemical catalyst augmentations may have passed on, but again, we don't know to what degree. And this is where it gets interesting. Now, again, having kids with normal humans passes down the genetic augmentations, but they would be diluted. However, it's also significantly possible that Spartan 4s can end up having kids with other Spartan 4s. In fact, it may even be possible with earlier generations of Spartans, depending on if the opportunity is given for a relationship to bloom. Ultimately, the familiarity and affectionate relationship occasionally demonstrated between Naomi 010 and the Marines of Kilo 5 indicate that Spartan 2s are not entirely unable to be reached on an emotional level. So if there were circumstances presented where Spartan 2s or Spartan 3s could have extended contact and interaction with Spartan 4s, it is possible that attraction could be developed thereafter, ultimately leading to a relationship, then leading to children. So what does this mean for the future of the Spartan program, and indeed humanity at large? Well, for the Spartan program, it's worth defining them as a genus. Homo sapiens sapiens, that's who we are. You and I are Homo sapiens sapiens. And that means wise man, and it was a subspecies of Homo sapiens that was said to have been distinguished around 160,000 years ago and was the genus of humans that rapidly spread to colonize every corner of the Earth, as we have. In the Halo universe, all human beings that undergo genetic, surgical, chemical, biological, and/or cybernetic augmentation are defined as Homo sapiens orgeus, meaning augmented wise man. So all Spartan classes are defined as such. Now, what does that mean in the future? Well, a few things. 1. Children born of a Spartan parent and a normal human would be inherently superior to normal base humans and be that much more capable following augmentation should they follow in their Spartan parents' footprints and enlist with the UNSC. They'd likely be completely pre-approved for service within the Spartan branch just due to their bloodline. These advanced humans would likely have to be redefined as being something along the lines of Homo sapiens novus, meaning wise new man, as the pre-existing superior genetics and transmissible augmentations present from conception would undoubtedly give them an edge. Now, 2, there may actually be something of a discrete Oni incentive that could be put in place to quietly encourage the interbreeding of Spartans to produce offspring with refined and superior genetics above the aforementioned Homo sapiens novus, as these children of multiple Spartan parents would be an entirely new genus of humanity altogether, with immensely superior base characteristics, more in line with that of the ancient human empire before they were devolved by the foreigners. This entirely separate genus of humans, Homo sapiens elegare, if you will, or elite wise man, would be the absolute pinnacle of human potential before even being given augmentations. And finally, the very fact that the Spartan program is now public means that certain standards of conduct must be abided by, and certain sociological, socio-economic, and socio-political systems start to come into play. For example, these children of Spartans, no matter what genus or heritage, wouldn't be able to be forced into military service. Now yes, conscription for the Spartan 2 and 3 programs did exist, but it was really only employed for those purposes whilst the programs were still classified only blank projects. Spartan 4s aren't conscripted, they're enlisted. Spartan 4s cannot be conscripted, nor can any other human for that matter, at least as far as the UEG is concerned. So this means it's entirely possible that there would be naturally superior or naturally augmented human beings in normal civilized society, having made the choice to avoid military service and follow a different career path. Well, this then presents an interesting problem for the job climate. With humans who are taller, faster, stronger, or more intelligent than the average human, jobs requiring these traits could be entirely dominated by these advanced humans, whether they received additional enhancing augmentations or not. In competitive sports, such as sprinting or endurance sports, these Spartan offspring would break every possible record currently on the books with little effort. Competitions of strength, such as the world's strongest man, could theoretically be entirely rewritten, because the top competitors would be capable of lifting over a metric ton as a warm-up. Even their enhanced intelligence, reaction times, and vision could potentially mean even jobs that aren't centered around physical feats could be dominated by these enhanced humans. Pilots, jobs in space, high-level corporate executives, politicians, scientists, engineers, practically every single field of work could see an influx of superior humans that would leave the average human at a significant disadvantage. This could in turn demand for publicly available augmentation technology, which would then level the playing field. However, that could also be very easily monopolised and thus be reserved only for the extremely wealthy, leaving the poorer classes entirely out of the equation. Even sociologically, men and women looking for a prospective partner could prioritise these advanced human traits, as not only would they be more capable in the workplace and in emergency situations and have more viability for different types of work and access to different fields, but any children they would have with these superior human beings would have superior inherent traits, giving them the best possible start in life, again meaning that the average human would find it much more difficult to find a mate and ultimately pass on their bloodline. And the more that you think about this situation, the deeper and more convoluted it becomes. The more that Spartan genetics, the more that Spartan augmentations that are transmissible to the offspring perpetuate through the human genus, the more quantity of enhanced human beings would then exist, and then the large gulfs between human capability start to open up, which then leads to openings of gulfs in class divides and socio-political circles that ultimately starts to fracture human society at its core, unless this situation is mediated in an extremely intelligent way. And again, the more that you think about it, the more you think about the superior Spartan genetics, the perpetuation of these inherent traits across humanity, the complex interbreeding of existing Spartans, whom will ultimately have a life outside of military service, specifically in reference to the Spartan 4s. The more jobs that you consider, the more all of this starts to affect our socio-economic and socio-political structures in civilization. The more certain types of people are picked for certain jobs, the more certain types of people are picked to be partners, to have children with, to perpetuate those genes still further. The more you think about it, the more convoluted and deep it becomes, and that's when you realise the true gravity of what Dr. Halsey once said.
My Spartans are humanity's next step. Our destiny as a species.
But are we really ready for that? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider smashing the like button and leave a comment below on what you'd like me to cover next. Big shout out to my patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my installation, Falcon, Prophet Bear, Mikhail, Sophia, and Ashley, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Scarab, Spartan0137, Anthony, Ghost, Aaron, Chris, Jacob, Sean, Element Zero, Somatic, Jordan J3, Dan, Mr. Keys, Directal, Gunslinger, Jacob, Bandmill, Echo, Evermore, Officer Cat, and Personal Devil, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers. And all the other patrons who have jumped aboard to support the channel. It means more to me than I can accurately put into words. Another shout out to my Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, Jacob, Schmitty, Talia, Fenrir and Born Stellar, and all the other YouTube members keeping my installation running on that glorious vacuum energy. Shout out to John for I don't fucking know. And if you want more of this kind of content, hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you don't miss any future videos, and consider jumping aboard yourself as a patron or YouTube member to keep the channel alive and kicking. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.